Imagine a throne, ancient and golden, standing at the heart of a vast kingdom. Its weight is not merely in its metal, but in the responsibility it bears the dreams, fears, and destinies of all who dwell under its rule. The king who sits upon it is no ordinary man. He is the archetype of order, the embodiment of power, and the steward of purpose. Yet, to be a king is not to be infallible. It is to wrestle with the chaos within and without, to balance strength with wisdom, and to wield authority with a heart attuned to the greater good. In the tapestry of human consciousness, the king is one of the most enduring and universal archetypes, as old as the first tribes that gathered around a fire to choose a leader. From the myths of Gilgamesh to the legends of Arthur, from the philosophical musings of Plato to the psychological depths explored by Carl Jung, the king represents the pinnacle of human potential, the capacity to think with power and live with purpose. But what does it mean to embody the king? How do we cultivate the qualities of sovereignty in a world that often feels fragmented, uncertain, and chaotic? This is not a tale of crowns and conquests alone. It is a journey into the psyche, where the king resides not on a throne of stone, but in the center of our being. As Carl Jung taught us, archetypes are not distant gods or abstract ideals. They are living forces within us, shaping our thoughts, actions, and destinies. To understand the king is to understand ourselves, our capacity for leadership, our struggle for meaning, and our quest to bring order to the chaos of existence. In this exploration, we will traverse the landscapes of myth, literature, and psychology, drawing on Jung's insights to illuminate the king's role in our lives. We will meet the king in his many guises: the wise ruler, the wounded sovereign, the tyrant, and the visionary. We will uncover the shadow that lurks beneath the crown and the light that shines through a heart aligned with purpose. And we will ask, how can we, in our modern lives, think like a king, not to dominate, but to create, to inspire, and to serve? So, take your seat in the great hall of the mind. The king is calling. Let us answer. In Jungian psychology, the king is the archetype of order, structure, and authority. He is the axis mundi, the central pillar around which the world turns. Just as the sun anchors the solar system, the king anchors the psyche, providing stability, direction, and meaning. Jung saw the king as a symbol of the self, the totality of the psyche, integrating the conscious and unconscious, the ego and the shadow, the masculine and the feminine. To embody the king is to achieve a state of wholeness, where power is not wielded for its own sake but in service to a higher purpose. The king is not born in a vacuum. He emerges from the chaos of the collective, rising to meet the needs of his people. In ancient myths, the king was often chosen by the gods, anointed with divine authority. Think of King David in the Hebrew Bible, selected not for his strength but for his heart, or Odysseus, whose cunning and resilience made him a leader among men. These stories remind us that true kingship is not about physical might or inherited wealth. It is about the capacity to think clearly, act decisively, and inspire others to rise above their fears. Yet, the king is not without his trials. Jung emphasized that archetypes are dual-natured, containing both light and shadow. The light of the king is his ability to create order, foster justice, and nurture growth. His shadow is the temptation to dominate, to cling to power, or to impose order at the expense of freedom. The tyrant, the dictator, the authoritarian, these are the king's shadow selves, distorted reflections of what happens when power is divorced from purpose. To think like a king, then, is to walk a narrow path. It requires the courage to lead, the humility to listen, and the wisdom to know when to act and when to yield. As Jung wrote, the greatest danger lies in the unconscious assumption that one is already whole. The king who believes he has nothing left to learn is no king at all. He is a fool in a crown. Let us turn to myth, where the king's archetype shines brightest. In the Arthurian legends, King Arthur is the quintessential sovereign, uniting a fractured land under the banner of Camelot. His round table, where no knight sat above another, symbolizes the king's role as a unifier, not a dominator. Yet, Arthur's story is also one of tragedy. His kingdom falls not because of external enemies, but because of internal betrayal. Guinevere's infidelity, Lancelot's divided loyalty, and Mordred's rebellion. Arthur's wound, like the Fisher King's, is not merely physical but spiritual, a failure to fully integrate the shadow within his court and himself. The Fisher King, a central figure in the Grail myths, offers another lens on the king's psychology. Wounded in the thigh, a symbolic castration, he presides over a barren land, unable to heal himself or his kingdom. His salvation lies in the arrival of Parsifal, the innocent fool, who must ask the question, whom does the Grail serve? This question is the key to the king's redemption, for it shifts the focus from personal power to collective purpose. The Fisher King reminds us that a true king serves something greater than himself, whether it is the land, the people, or the divine. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest stories, we see the king's journey from arrogance to wisdom. Gilgamesh begins as a tyrant, oppressing his people with his unchecked power. His friendship with Enkidu, a wild man created by the gods, and the subsequent loss of Enkidu to death, force Gilgamesh to confront his mortality and seek the meaning of his rule. His quest for immortality fails, but in its failure, he finds a deeper truth. A king's legacy is not in eternal life, but in the works he leaves behind and the lives he touches. These myths teach us that the king's journey is never solitary. He is defined by his relationships with his people, his advisors, his enemies, and his own psyche. To think with power and purpose is to recognize that leadership is not about standing alone, but about standing for something. Literature, like myth, holds a mirror to the king's archetype, revealing its complexities and contradictions. In Shakespeare's King Lear, we meet a king who begins as a figure of absolute authority, but descends into madness when his power is challenged. Lear's tragedy is his failure to distinguish true loyalty from flattery. His daughters Goneril and Regan betray him, while Cordelia, who speaks truth without adornment, is cast out. Lear's journey through the storm, both literal and metaphorical, strips him of his illusions and forces him to confront his own humanity. In his madness, he finds wisdom, realizing that a king's true power lies not in his crown, but in his capacity for love and forgiveness. Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov offers another perspective on the king through the character of Dmitri Karamazov. Dmitri is no literal king, but he embodies the archetype's struggle for self-mastery. Torn between passion and duty, he wrestles with his desires and his moral obligations. His journey toward redemption reflects the king's task of integrating the chaotic impulses of the unconscious with the ordered principles of the conscious mind. As Jung might say, Dmitri's path is one of individuation, the process of becoming whole by embracing both the light and shadow within. In J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, Aragorn represents the king in his fullest expression. A reluctant leader, Aragorn spends much of the story as a ranger, hiding his royal lineage. His journey to the throne of Gondor is not merely a physical quest, but a psychological one, requiring him to accept his destiny and the burdens of leadership. Aragorn's power lies not in his sword, but in his ability to inspire hope, heal wounds, and unite disparate peoples. He is the king who serves, embodying Jung's ideal of the self as a center of harmony and purpose. These literary kings remind us that power is not a static possession, but a dynamic process. To think like a king is to engage in constant self-reflection, to question one's motives, and to align one's actions with a vision of the greater good. No exploration of the king would be complete without confronting his shadow. The shadow, in Jungian terms, is the unacknowledged part of the psyche, desires, fears, and impulses we repress or deny. For the king, the shadow manifests as the tyrant, the ruler who seeks power for its own sake. History is replete with such figures. Nero, who burned Rome for his own amusement. Macbeth, whose ambition drives him to murder. and modern dictators who sacrifice their people for personal glory. The tyrant is not merely an external figure. He lurks within each of us. When we cling to control, silence, dissent, or prioritize our ego over the needs of others, we give voice to the tyrant within. Jung warned that the shadow grows stronger when ignored, projecting itself onto others in the form of blame, fear, or hatred. The king who refuses to face his shadow risks becoming his own worst enemy, undermining the very order he seeks to create. Yet, the shadow is not merely a source of destruction. Jung believed that confronting the shadow is a necessary step toward individuation. By acknowledging our flaws, insecurities, and destructive impulses, we gain the power to transform them. The king who integrates his shadow becomes not a tyrant but a wise ruler, capable of wielding power with compassion and clarity. In Jungian psychology, the animath feminine aspect of the male psyche plays a crucial role in the king's development. The anima is the bridge to the unconscious, guiding the king toward emotional depth and intuition. Without the anima, the king becomes rigid, overly rational, and disconnected from the needs of his people. In myth, the king's relationship with the feminine is often symbolized by his queen or consort. In the Arthurian legends, Guinevere represents Arthur's anima, embodying both his inspiration and his vulnerability. Her affair with Lancelot reveals the unintegrated aspects of Arthur's psyche, leading to the collapse of Camelot. Similarly, in the Grail myths, the maiden who carries the Grail symbolizes the feminine principle of renewal, which the Fisher King must embrace to heal his wound. To think with power and purpose, the king must cultivate a relationship with the feminine within. This means valuing intuition over logic alone, embracing vulnerability as a strength, and recognizing the interconnectedness of all life. The king who honors the anima is not diminished but enriched, for he draws on the full spectrum of human experience to guide his rule. In our modern era, the archetype of the king feels both distant and urgently needed. We live in a world of fractured systems, competing narratives, and existential uncertainties. The traditional symbols of kingship, crowns, thrones, and scepters seem outdated, yet the qualities of the king vision, integrity, and responsibility are more relevant than ever. To think like a king in the 21st century is to lead in the face of ambiguity. It is to create order, not through force, but through inspiration, to foster unity in a divided world, and to act with purpose in a culture that often prioritizes distraction over meaning. Whether in the boardroom, the classroom, or the family, the king's archetype calls us to step into our own authority, not to dominate, but to serve. Jung's concept of individuation offers a roadmap for this journey. To become a king is to undertake the lifelong process of self-discovery, confronting our shadows, integrating our contradictions, and aligning our actions with our deepest values. It is to recognize that true power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering ourselves. At the heart of the king's psychology is a single transformative question. Whom do you serve? This is the question Parsifal failed to ask the Fisher King, and it is the question each of us must answer in our own lives. Do we serve our ego, our fears, our fleeting desires? Or do we serve something greater, a vision, a community, a truth? The king who serves only himself is no king at all. True kingship is rooted in sacrifice, in the willingness to put the needs of the whole above the desires of the self. As Jung wrote, "The individual is obliged to live his own life, but he is also obliged to live it for the sake of the community." The king's power is measured not by what he takes, but by what he gives. As we conclude this journey, let us return to the throne at the heart of the kingdom. It is not a throne of gold or stone, but a throne within the psyche, a place of clarity, strength, and purpose. To sit upon this throne is to embrace the archetype of the king, to think with power, and to live with intention. The world needs kings, not rulers in the old sense, but leaders who embody wisdom, compassion, and vision. In a time of chaos, the king brings order. In a time of despair, he offers hope. And in a time of division, he builds bridges. So, rise to the call of the king within you. Face your shadows, honor your anima, and ask the question that defines your reign. Whom do you serve? The answer will guide you to a life of power and purpose, not as a ruler of others, but as a sovereign of your own soul. Carl Jung once said, "The world hangs on a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man." The archetype of the king reminds us that the fate of the world begins within. By cultivating the qualities of the king, clarity, courage, and compassion, we become not only masters of our own lives, but stewards of a greater good. Let us walk the path of the king, not with arrogance, but with humility. Let us wield power, not to conquer, but to create. And let us live with purpose, knowing that the throne we seek is already ours, waiting to be claimed.